The Eidoru P-1 is an amazing backing track player that has MIDI in and out on the side of it. So here's how you can control it with something like the SPD-SX or pretty much any MIDI controller. So firstly, the only thing you'll need is a 5-pin MIDI cable. You can get these on Amazon or pretty much anywhere that sells cables. What I like to do for these is make sure they last a long time by getting a fancy, what are they called? Fancy loomed one, because I use both in and out, but you can just do with the one. It's completely up to you. And then the only other thing is that you'll actually need to access the documentation of the P1, because this is going to have a massive list of all of the MIDI notes and the things you can control. So in this video, I'm going to only MIDI control play and stop, whereas you can do like next song, next set list, previous set list, loads of other stuff that you might be interested in doing. You can find this at support.eidoru.live/MIDI. I also highly recommend checking out the rest of the documentation because it's really nicely laid out, and there's so much you can do with it that's really cool. So once you've done that, plug your 5-pin MIDI cable into the MIDI out of the SPD-SX or whichever MIDI controller you're using, and then plug the other end into the MIDI in of the Eidoru, because you're sending it out of your MIDI controller and in to the Eidoru. And then obviously if you want to send MIDI out of the Eidoru, you put the MIDI out of the Eidoru in to your MIDI controller, and it's wonderful. See how that works? It's kind of took my head a few minutes to like get around that, you know what I mean? But now we've got it. And then in theory, if that's all in the right things, that's pretty much it. You're good to go. Just set up the Eidoru where you want it, and same with your MIDI controller, in my case the SPD-SX, wherever you want it. So now is the fun bit of assigning each pad on the SPD-SX its MIDI, and this is going to be what it's going to send out to the Eidoru. So to do that, what we're going to do is going to hit Menu, go over to Kit, and then use the bottom 3 buttons underneath the screen to go to MIDI. Now there's 2 things you'll want to change here. The first is the pad channel, and you'll want to change this to 15, because that's the channel that the Eidoru is listening to. If it's not on channel 15, it won't hear the MIDI note. And you want to change this for every pad you're using. So for example, if you're using the SPD-SX as both a MIDI controller and a sample pad, maybe you only want 4 of the 9 pads to send out MIDI. So in this case, you choose your 4 pads and then you change them to pad channel 15, and then you leave the rest as is. And that means the Eidoru will only listen to those 4 pads. And then next, we want to change the MIDI note itself. And this is where it's going to get specific. So for the play button, I'm going to use pad 4. It's labeled beautifully in pink on my SPD-SX. But looking at the documentation, this is going to be MIDI note E1 or note 28. And this is because each pad sends out one individual MIDI note, not CC data, which is a bunch of MIDI notes. And then stop for me is going to be pad 5, where it's labeled stop, and this is going to be note F1 or 29. So I'm just going to change the number to 29. And in theory, if we now hit the SPD-SX to play a track, this should now play on the Eidoru. And then same thing, if we want to stop the track, you hit the stop. So like I said, you can now take this and assign it to loads of different stuff, like next playlist, previous playlist, next song, previous song. And this isn't even including sending MIDI out of the Eidoru into the SPD-SX to patch change per track, which is a whole other bucket of fish. But it starts getting really cool when you start messing with MIDI in this sort of world. And the best bit is that we're doing all of this without a laptop. So as always, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section down below. And with that, I hope you enjoy MIDI controlling the Eidoru P-1 with your MIDI controller.